What's up, everybody? Yeah, I'm back. I know, twice in a day, right? What is up with that? But while I was uploading the last video, I had a great call with Gareth. We were chit-chatting for a bit about some interesting things that's developing over there in Europe. Um, and I got a chance to review my video and realized that there's a couple things I kind of wanted to touch base on that I don't think I completed the thought that I wanted to get across. So I wanted to kind of make it a little addendum, a little addition here to that video. But since that video was recorded, we've actually got two new backers. We got Frederick Hornhaver and Martin Hinvies. I'm not sure if I said your last names right. I apologize if I got those wrong. But just to kind of start out, a little bit about what Gareth and I were speaking about. Um, he told me that he met with the owner of JD Games today, who sounds like a very cool dude and a very avid gamer in his own right. And there's a lot of excitement going on over there. Um, and how while Gareth was in the store speaking with him, um, he was playing the videos there on his screen in his shop, and our Kickstarter campaign video, which I thought was pretty cool to find out that there's gamers actually crowding around the display, and that Gareth actually got into kind of like a little question and answer session with some people there, and there's like a real fervor in the crowd, and that people were really getting excited about this. To me, that's just awesome. To see people getting excited about something I've been dreaming about making my entire life and seeing come into reality at this point. It's very inspirational, and I just wanted to give a shout out again to JD Games. It sounds like we're gonna have a really cool set of a relationship, and they're probably going to end up being our European sponsor, and have some pretty cool exclusive rewards for people who buy their games or our games from their stores. So there's some interesting things going there, and I'll keep you guys updated with how that all pans out as things develop into the future. But I just wanted to touch base on that real quick. And then I wanted to go back to the question relating to the Empire and the defensive type stuff. And if any of you guys have watched Cowboy Bebop, it's an old anime. If you haven't seen it, it's actually considered to be one of the greatest of all time. It's fantastic series. Um, in that, you'll see that there's kind of like a transport network within that civilization, where it helps the individual starships. They'll have their own warp drives or whatever, but when they're trying to go from like point A to point B very quickly, they'll jump into these transport networks, if you would. And that's kind of what I mean when I say like the warp gates. Essentially, the players of this game will have as I've spoke about before, players won't be locked to an empire. I kind of also want to touch base on something that was brought up by KRM 398 the other day as a question I didn't touch on as much as I wanted to. So I'm going to kind of talk about both of those things in one. KRM had asked about a lone captain, a non-empire player, and what kind of an experience they will be getting. So I just want to kind of go over this a little bit. So regarding first off the defensive networks, I mentioned the starting point where if a player creates a new empire or a group of players, which is something I wanted to clarify. It's not necessarily a single player mode; it'd still be multiplayer. So if you have like say a guild where you have even 50, 100, whatever number of players, your empire will start out in this bubble like I was explaining. So you guys will have a chance to get your footing before opening yourself up to the rest of the universe. And the size of that bubble is going to be large enough to actually have a pretty interesting and fun time. I mean, it may include 10 star systems or something. Something to where civilization may start out on a single planet, but as they'll have room to where they can explore and really experience a lot of what different elements within the game world before they actually basically breach their bubble of undiscovery and make themselves expose themselves to the rest of the universe. So, just to kind of like, expand on that a little bit. I mean, think of it, it's a multiplayer environment, but it's a sectioned off environment from the rest of the universe in terms of combat and everything else with empire situations. But within that sphere, however big we finally decide it's going to be, there will be lots of room for things to happen. I mean, you have to remember, with the size of a planet, we're talking about, think about how big Earth is. Earth is a small planet. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, there are planets out there as big as our solar system, for God's sake. So, the possibilities are quite drastic in terms of how that's going to play out. But, the Earth is huge. And, if once, a player is exposed, now that I covered, a little bit more about that, once a player is exposed, you'll have these civilizations who are waging wars against each other. And the process, the idea behind a campaign, you would have essentially, we'll just break it down into two primary groups: your direct push for the core worlds and your procedural or progressive campaign. And the what do you call it, the balancing factor, or the risk versus reward type concept. If you nuke the surface of a planet, you're essentially making it an inhospitable planet to most forms of life. So the idea of doing orbital bombardments, it may be attractive if your only goal is to destroy, but if your goal is to conquer or to take over ownership of a planet, just flat out orbital striking the surface of a planet is going to change what that planet means to the attacking empire. If the goal is to take over ownership and essentially make it now a part of their empire, their goal will end up being to defeat the military and take over the government and essentially absorb the population. That's one possibility. The other thing is, like I said, if they use certain kinds of weapons of mass destruction, they'll end up making the planet no longer hospitable. Therefore, it changes the dynamic. The type of attack that they embark on will actually change the dynamic of what they get as a reward for winning the combat. So it'll players will have to actually gauge what kind of an offensive they're going to be doing. I mean, obviously, using planet killing technology, it may send a message and try and keep a galactic order within an evil empire or something. But I mean, once you've destroyed that planet, you've just destroyed all of the resources, all of the natural inhabitants, all of the civilians. You basically didn't gain anything. All you did was remove a threat. So, using, like I said, planet-killing technology or orbital bombardments, it is possible, but it's not necessarily going to be the always the number one choice for how people go about doing things. A lot of civilizations are probably going to be looking for slaves, for example. So, that's one of the reasons why our game's going to be rated M. There's actually going to be slavery. You'll actually be able to enslave an AI or an enemy civilization. And as a result of that, people will have to take their combat or their strategy and how they're approaching a war into consideration. Is what are they looking to get out of it? What is the end result? Is it simply removing a threat, or is it expansion, or is it looking for absorbing technology, or is it looking to absorb civilians? Is it looking to enslave civilizations? There's a lot of different factors involved. So it's kind of has a kind of a built-in system of risk and reward. What you actually get as a result of what you fielded, and everything has, like I said, because it has an actual energy cost and it has a drain. You're going to say, okay, well, yeah, I can fire this planet-killing weapon, but each time I push the go button, I just consumed all of these resources doing that. So I'm not just going to, I can't foresee anyone fielding planet-killing technology and just flying around the universe all willy-nilly, blasting planets out of the sky. The cost to their empire to field that device and to fire that device is going to be so great that it's literally going to be kind of like a last resort kind of concept. I mean, it's just the development time and everything else. So the systems are designed around this concept of maintaining a balance in risk versus reward, what you get versus what you do, and so on and so forth. So I kind of wanted to just touch up a little bit on that side of things. Um, what was the other thing? Oh yeah, for the freelancers, let's like look at, like, for example, the Firefly series, the Battlestar Galactica. God, the list is massive. Even your Star Trek, explorers. Star Trek is individual captains within a federation of planets, which is an alliance that explore the universe and seek out trade and everything else. This is something that's going to be possible, and hopefully, players will be able to do whatever the heck they want. But in all reality, that's a very real possibility of how the game will actually play. You'll be a captain, you'll have your ship, you'll have your crew, and you're a member of an empire, and you have a mission, and you go around, you explore and meet new planets, and sometimes you'll get attacked and you have to defend yourself, and other times you'll meet friendly travelers and build new negotiations and open up political alliances and talks and so on and so forth, and trade and all these different interesting elements. But an individual captain, just get back to the empire alignment thing. Players will not be faction locked, and I want to kind of touch base on it. And this is one of the areas where I think I didn't clarify quite as much as I'd like to have, which is why I wanted to record this. What that really means, I mean, you have to really think about this for a moment. This is fundamentally different than like pretty much any other game on the market. When you think of an MMO, RPG, RTS, you start the game aligning yourself essentially to a faction, and as the game progresses, you're always locked to that faction. One of the only games I've ever played that actually allowed you to change your faction was Anarchy Online. Or maybe even Neocron, which is another great old game. I love Neocron. That was a game way before its time, but it was cool in its day. If those of you who never played it, you missed out. That was an interesting one, but a lot of bugs, but very cool concept. But basically, all that to say, that by players not being faction locked, to a particular empire. Let's just kind of like go through a hypothetical situation here. Player A decides to join the game. They're presented with, do you want to create your own species? They say, yes, I want to create my own species. And then they go through, they create their species. And they say, okay, do you want to create your own empire? And they say, no, I do not want to create my own empire. So they get to spend some extra points. They allot those points. Like I said, the system is based on, you have a pool of points and you can spend them in all these different ways, and they have different merit in different areas, so it has an internal balancing system. But let's say that someone wants to create a solo captain and a ship, and that's his goal. His goal isn't to create an empire. His goal isn't to create some kind of giant conglomeration. He essentially wants to spend all of his points in very few units, very few characters, very few elements. Once, depending, as they go through the process of filtering down into their various options, they'll end up with essentially like a history generator of sorts. Even a civilization, a species, when they spend all these points to say, okay, I want to be this genetic mutation and this technological level, there will be essentially a history that exists before the player pushes go. That'll be like kind of the lore that's generated around that particular set of entities. So, to try and explain this, let's say that you create a civilization, or you create an individual captain in a ship or whatever. The options that you choose will essentially present you with some possible histories that you could say, okay, well, I like the way that one sounds. That's what I want my history to be. And it'll be a logic-based due process of elimination, if you will, on, well, obviously, if you're going for these kinds of crazy mutations, then all of these things don't fit, or technological or whatever. So it'll filter so that the options that you're presented with will fit your point allocation. But as a player, it'll actually give you a backstory to your civilization or to your character that is directly linked to the choices you made before hitting the finalize button. And once you do that, it'll, for role players, it's essentially generating a backstory for you, that you can then go in and customize. Like I said, there'll be some options that people can, once they're presented with the here's your basics, they'll be able to customize it a little bit and so on and so forth. But getting back to the captains, the individual captain, not the civilization. Did want to cover that the backstory generator part. But to get into back to the captain, say someone creates this captain and their ship, and they spend all their points into a very small pool of game objects. What they'll end up having is, whether it's, talk about like the Serenity, for example, from Firefly, or the Battlestar Galactica, the Battlestars type ship, and being the that whole concept of just continuing to travel through the galaxy and scavenge materials and just keep the ship flying and taking on jobs in various civilizations. That'll be very realistic within the game world, and what will be possibilities for players. I personally, I love that kind of series. Cowboy Bebop and Firefly have a lot in common in that. Just being a lone bounty hunter or a lone, gun for hire that just kind of travels around, takes odd jobs, and wants to explore the universe. And when they come across something that's dangerous, they go the other direction, and then only pick their fights very carefully, and maybe build up notoriety and so on and so forth within the universe, and get contacted by various civilizations to take these, just that's a very real possibility. That's a very, important side to the gameplay to us. So I just wanted to make sure that you understood this isn't purely an Empire simulation. It isn't purely, something that if you don't have a lot of friends, you're going to be like, hey, well, how do I fit into this universe? Back to the faction lock stuff. Once they've created that species, and they say, no, I don't want to be part of an empire. Okay, yes, I do want to create an organization. I want to put all of my AI, all of my family dynasty, all of my sphere of influence AI characters into this, like a little flotilla, for example, as Gareth had mentioned. Where it's a group of ships that travel together, and you might have technology, through your tech tree options that you spent your points, you developed like in a couple of tack barges, a couple of not transport, but traveling, or a ship that's like, for example, in Stargate universe, ships that like the Siege ships, where they were actually building Stargates, and they had like a factory inside of the ship kind of deal, or even like in Battlestar, where they were manufacturing their own spaceships on the Battlestars and then deploying them. They'll have that kind of concept where you can actually make a floating spaceship that has a factory to produce smaller units and so on and so forth, and just kind of travel around the galaxy. Now, because they're not faction locked, they're not like limited, they're not like right from the get-go. When you think of a normal game, you think of like, World of Warcraft, Anarchy Online, or any of these other kind of games. Each faction essentially has like a color to them. You're red, you're blue, whatever. In the game that this target is friendly, this target is an enemy, and you can't attack your friends, and you can only attack your enemies, and all enemies are immediately highlightable. This is a different concept. It's not like you're going to have Horde versus Alliance. You're going to have just characters. You aren't going to have like some kind of like little indicator saying, hey, this guy's a part of XYZ Alliance floating over his head. Every character is just a character. Militaries and civilizations will have the option of going with an IFF device, which will, in terms of targeting, allow them to filter out their friends as far as targets. But if their friend gets caught in the crossfire, or gets caught in a blast radius, or an AoE explosion, they will still do damage to them. The friendly fire concept is very much alive and kicking in this, because to make this to where a spy can really truly be a spy, or a scout ship, doesn't necessarily broadcast, hey, I'm an enemy, right from the get-go. It's all based on the rules of the Empire, how the Empire is set up. If the Empire has kill on sight anything that is not broadcasting an IFF signal, well, people will start to learn that don't go into that territory. That's, excuse me, that's, hostile turf, avoid it kind of deal. And, they'll be flagging themselves within the game world as being, not friendly. But there won't be like some kind of built-in, automatic system to where, things will just treat everything automatically as hostile. Everything will be equal. Every civilization, every, species, without an IFF signal being broadcast, they're all the same. There is no empire tag attached visibly in the world, through the UI, unless someone has built up like a database of known enemy, civilizations and combatants and species and stuff like that, which will be linked to technology and linked to the UI. So if you're in war with a particular species, you can, for example, catalog a ship and say ships that match this, description, ships in this particular group are considered hostile, and attack those ships, those particular types of ships on site, because, you know, again, it's taking things from a much more realistic perspective than the average game has been, developed. And it's not that it's harder; it's just approaching it from a different perspective. Making everyone locked to a single faction versus multiple factions. It's just where do they exist within a hierarchy? Um, so, the idea that, there is no faction locked is you could have a single a single character who is a citizen of however many empires they want. Organizations as well. Like, so let's say you're a mogul type. You want to be, a trader. Your goal isn't to conquer the universe with force. Your goal is to buy the universe and essentially own the rights to, natural resources and different planets and this, and trade, and, you develop technology and you sell it to the highest bidder and all this kind of crazy stuff. A gamer who wants to play on like that perspective, they'll basically say, find civilizations that are interested, using like scout ship, smaller convoy type deals to, open up negotiations, get the rights to build within an unknown empire or a newly discovered empire. And once they've, satisfied the agreements between the empire and the organization, then the organization can start, buying property and developing the property within that empire for their organization, building buildings and so on. So you'll have these organizations, essentially guilds, that'll be, literally be a part of multiple different empires, crossing hundreds or hundreds of thousands of different solar systems, and won't be directly linked. Now, again, like I said, there will be broadcasting IFF type situations because, that guy has the loudest truck in the whole world, and he drives back and forth constantly. It drives me bonkers. But anyway, sorry about that. Um, Basically, a person where was I? He was so loud, I lost my train of thought. Um, Give me a second here. Let me go ahead and light another smoke, try and regain my thought process. Okay, so alliances, for example, will be able to, basically say, hey, let's attune our IFF signals, or put a set of requirements for individual captains and individual spaceships and so on and so forth to like pay a fee and have access to these types of like a tiered concept of IFF, to where you have a military IFF and a civilian IFF and a ally IFF, so you'll be able to easily filter between various groups, but the management system between these groups will be controlled by the actual empires and the players themselves. So they'll be able to, in real time, or dynamically as the game is being played, alter what is considered a friend, what is considered a foe, and keep it very much up to date with what's actually happening. So if a civilization has an alliance and then they double cross them, you can immediately say, okay, well, that group's essentially that group's IFF, that group's signal is now considered a hostile signal, and all the AI will treat it as a hostile, and because they've been attacked. And again, this is where having ambassadors and politicians and so on and so forth will start to really come into play, and working out these different trade negotiations and everything else. So that's very exciting, and no game has ever done this, and we developed these systems, and like I said, I mean, the majority of our team is programmers. I'm the only artist on the team, so everything you've seen so far is something I've produced, and that's why I apologize that I'm working as fast as I can to try and make some more pretty stuff for you guys to see and get excited about. But there's a lot of this that's really behind the scenes coding that's gone into the system designs and the programming that it's just so exciting, that's never been done before, and we've done it, and we're like, we just can't wait for you guys to be able to get your hands on it and start playing with it. But it's a complete philosophical difference in how we approach designing a game. We're making an open world, sandbox, event-driven game, not a what do you call it, a theme park story-driven game. We will have story elements that we might introduce to various regions of the galaxy to kind of spice things up a little bit, but they'll be event-driven. Things will create conflict and adventure and so on and so forth, but it'll all be based on an event-driven system. So players will have the options of how they approach it. There may be situations where two civilizations are fighting, and something happens, a dynamic event occurs in the universe, and all of a sudden they go, hey, you know what, we have a bigger problem than trying to kill each other. Let's work together now, and we'll go back to killing each other when we solve this problem. So there's going to be like a lot of dynamic and changing elements in the event system, in how the universe evolves and how it affects players and what they'll do. And it's really, really, really cool. I just can't wait for you guys to see it. But there was one thing I just said, and I got to remember what it was, because I wanted to expand on that one element. Then I'm going to go ahead and call it a day and get back to work on art. What was it? Ooh, I'm going to pause this for a second and try and think of what it was I was just going to say. Oh yeah, now I remember. Okay, back to the waging war in a campaign against another civilization. All right. Because the combat is, as we've described, going to be, an option between the RAE and the RAF system, which is your more MMO style versus your more first-person, third-person style combat, flight simulation type style combat. Because that's the type of combat that's going to occur, whether it's in a spaceship, it's in ground vehicles, it's in mechanized standing tanks, it's in massive, cruisers and corvettes and battle stars and motherships and carriers and all these different, different sizes and styles and ideas of ships. The way, even though the combat itself is going to be very, very intense and fast-paced, the concept of waging war against another empire, because it's based on a simulation principle, because it's based in reality, not based on purely arcade action style gaming, campaigns are going to be much more progressive. They're going to be, the idea of a massive initial push, strategy and tactics are going to be the defining factors in these wars, more than just raw technology. Like I said, I've said before, an inferior force using their brain should be capable of defeating a superior force. The underdog can win in this environment. It's all a matter of how you apply and how you cooperate and how you execute your plans and what you do. But if you have two different empires that are, by the time they breach their bubble, they should be developed enough to be able to stand on their own 2 feet in a galactic environment. But basically, the way two civilizations will wage war against each other will be just like in any kind of, if you ever read sci-fi, if you ever watched movies, that's our goal, is to produce something to where it's progressive. You have an invasion force, but the invasion force is going to probably attack the outer planets first. Yeah, there will be those crazy guys who say, let's try and, design our ships on super, super fast speed and try and blow through and right past the outer defenses and try and get into the core worlds and do as much damage as possible. There will be people who will do that, and there will be advantages to doing that, but there's also going to be drawbacks. For example, cutting off your supplies, which I mentioned. You'll end up, encircled in enemy territory with no way to refuel or resupply, and you'll put yourself at an extreme disadvantage. So yeah, it is technically possible, but you'll have to weigh the risks of going for a bonsai style attack, because every time a troop dies, your force is reduced. Every time a ship is damaged, you have to repair it. Every time troops get injured, they will have to spend time in a med bay. There's that realistic element that's going on here. So, most campaigns, I would wager, will be waged in a procedure, a process, by capturing the outer worlds and setting up and developing bases, hospitals, factories, refineries, and these things, even in a smaller scale, just to be able to get the supply going. Because trying to send supplies from something that's 50,000, 100,000, a million light years away over here to this other solar system, you have that, okay, yeah, we're gonna reinforce our troops, but it's going to take a day to get there. It's going to take 2 days to get there, even at light speed. So you're going to have this situation where people are going to really truly have to take into consideration what their goals are, and plan and strategize how they plan to actually take over another environment. It's not, like I said, this is not a real-time strategy. This is a real-time role-playing strategic simulation. That last two parts, actually, the whole thing is, each one of those words is extremely important. There's a heavy emphasis on being able to role-play your own character and your own function within a society or outside of a society, being a space pirate, being a bounty hunter, being a profiteer, being a merchant or whatever. And the idea of it being a strategic, meaning strategy is a core, absolutely core concept that's involved in every aspect of how you're going to be waging wars, how you're going to be waging economic wars. You may start waging a war with a civilization by figuring out who their allies are and convincing their allies to switch sides, and that's the beginning of the war before it even gets to shooting guns at each other. Political warfare, for example, economic warfare, guerrilla warfare, all these elements that have never been produced in a game. These are the systems that we find most important, and we have to really, stress that by these things existing, the whole of what Praetoria is different than anything else out there. There's literally the chances of you guys seeing another game like this in the next several years. Someone will literally have to be copying our design to get here, because we're so far away. We're like, here's the industry going this way. We said, let's go that way. We don't like the direction of where games are going. More and more and more roller coasters, more and more, restrictions on player choice, more and more, levels and experience points and grinds. And so we're taking a completely different path. We're not even trying to be like anybody else. We're trying to do something that's you're never going to see, or hopefully we will be the only one you see for a long time on this, until some other developers really say, hey, we're going to copy that idea. And that's pretty much what's going to end up happening at some point, I'm sure, but hopefully not for a long time. But these types of systems are what's really going to set things apart, is that war will be waged in a very realistic fashion, that characters will have their own life cycles, that they will literally be almost as close to as we can get being art and programming living, breathing organisms. So anyway, this video ended up being almost as long, actually probably as long as the last one, but I really felt that that side of things needed to be expanded on, and I hope this is kind of clears up, helps round out some of the understanding of really what our intent is, and what the end effect is going to be for the player. And just to reiterate, from the earlier video, you PC gamers out there who are avid about PC games, back us now. You don't have to wait. uh, Even on when we release the mobile games will be released on a PC, and you'll be able to play Praetoria um, on your PC, even though it's technically considered a mobile element. You'll be able to carry over those stats and those accomplishments. And I'm not, like I said, there's some story related stuff that I can't get into to explain why and how it'll work out. But believe me when I say this, that it's a set in stone, system that's going to allow you to carry over your accomplishments from one game to the next, to the next, to the next, all the way up to the MMO. So, jumping in now, getting in at this point in time, you're going to definitely have advantages that someone who comes in later on is not going to have. Between the rewards that will be offered, these exclusive rewards like this, combat mini pet that's going to be added. That this is going to be one of those things that if you don't get it here, you're not going to get it. There will be, like I said, back to JD Games, there will be a reward that if you buy the game from JD Games, that you won't get that reward any other way than by buying it from them, because they're getting in at this point in time, and they're really truly as a company embracing the idea of what we're doing and going to help us push this project forward and get it out there in front of their users. As a result of that, we appreciate that concept, and we're going to we're gamers. We're not suits and ties. We're gamers. This is what we want to do. We want, we've seen and been at the receiving end of the game, developer player relationship. We've been on the player side and long enough to know what really makes us, what makes us excited, and what makes things exciting. And people who build the relationship up with us now, who jump in at this early standpoint when we're still getting this off the ground, they're going to reap the benefits in the long term. So, big thanks to JD Games for jumping in and believing in us, and thanks to all of our backers and all of you who are sitting on the fence and deciding whether you should be coming back or not. Just realize that we're going to do everything in our power to show you that we appreciate everything you do for us, that every little bit is going to make a difference, and we're going to give back 200% of what you give us or more, or however we can do it to sweeten the deal. Like I'm continuously going to keep adding more rewards and more rewards to the Kickstarter campaign. And the people who get in at the beginning, like we did with this 3-day early opening weekend, +1 to all backers. That ends tonight at midnight PST. Just a little reminder on that. But even that's our way of saying thank you to those people who are willing to jump on board with this in the first 3 days. We're almost up to $3,000 now in 3 days. And for a Kickstarter campaign, without a laundry list of 15-year, I've got every game under the sun as my background belt, kind of company. Like Star Citizen, they have some really big names involved in that game, and I'm also a fan of Star Citizen, just so you know. We don't have that kind of access to media, to the gaming magazines, and we're building from the ground up as an independent developer. So we are going to do everything in our power to show proper appreciation to people who believe in us and who share our vision and want to help make this reality. So I just want to say thank you, and I'm going to go ahead and cut it off here before I ramble anymore. But anyway, as I always say, this is Larrick with Invisionary, signing off.